What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. In past videos, I've talked about roller coasters that were never built, as in individual rides that were planned on being built at a specific location and never came to be. But today, I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach when it came to never built attractions. Instead of focusing on never built roller coasters, I want to look at never built roller coaster models. The difference? Think of a roller coaster model as a roller coaster type, like the B&M Invert as opposed to Raptor at Cedar Point. These are coaster types and coaster models where not one of them was sold and not one of them were built. These are very unique models, and if all of these models were here today, I'm sure the coaster industry would be very different. Before I get into the video, I just want to let you know that there are videos on YouTube like this, so I decided to look through forums on the internet throughout the years and reports from IAAPA trade shows from years past, and I decided that I found 10 of these concepts that I'm sure most people have not found out about. Now, I have a little bit of a challenge for you. I want you guys to tell me how many of these you knew prior to me making this, just to see how good I did on my research and uniqueness. You will not see any coasters like the Polar Coaster on here, because those are very widely known. Anyway, let's get right into these long forgotten concepts that were never built and forgotten in time. The first coaster I'm going to talk about is from an unexpected manufacturer, Fabry rides. Now, they're mostly known for their portable flat rides. You've probably ridden some of them. One of the more popular ones are the booster rides. They have dabbled in some roller coasters, but nothing more than 100 feet in height. Well, they decided that they wanted to take a thrill to the next level, and they decided to post a YouTube video of a brand new concept of a ride in the latter half of 2019. This wasn't some normal Fabry family coaster. It was no wacky worm, I could tell you that. This was definitely a thrill coaster, and provided some pretty unique elements, but is extremely bizarre. I mean, let's look at this layout. It starts off with a very fast launch and right into a brake run. This is probably the most pointless launch I've ever seen on a roller coaster. It doesn't have any kinetic energy to spare, it just goes right into the brakes. It's pretty depressing. And then you make a left-hand turn into what I would assume would be a vertical lift hill similar to a Chance Toboggan. It takes you to the top and drops you into a 3 inversion sequence, 2 loops, and what I would assume would be one of the craziest inversions on the planet. This thing looks fatal. This is a very low to the ground heartline roll that whips you right into the brake run. The rendering, well, it looks extremely fast-paced. Needless to say, with different manufacturers providing much more thrilling rides, and Fabry mostly being known for their flats, they decided to go a little bit out of their comfort zone, and it failed. They didn't spend too much money on this project, and it was nothing more than just a rendering and a proposal for a project. So, this long-lost project never really gained that much hype in the beginning, and faded into obscurity. And it's not even on the Fabry website anymore. The next model I want to get into is a Giovanola Terror Tilter. This was the original tilt coaster model debuting at IAAPA in 2000. If you don't know already, Giovanola is a manufacturer that has focused on a few roller coasters such as Titan at Over Texas, Anaconda at Gold Reef City, and Goliath at Magic Mountain. They don't really have much on their portfolio, but what they have are pretty impressive rides, and even at the time. Well, in 2000 they showed a model of a very unique roller coaster with a very unique tilt. Believe it or not, this was actually the first tilted coaster model. So this extremely unconventional 90-degree tilt came before Gravity Max. There was one buyer, like I said in past videos, it was Six Flags Magic Mountain, and it was actually going to be the original idea for the X trademark. But after Giovanola or however you pronounce it reached bankruptcy, they lost interest, obviously. So they went with aerodynamics for their X project, and Vekoma took the patent and made a very similar model. Up next, we have the S&S Twisted Looper. Take a 4D roller coaster and mash it with a Larson Super Loop. This was first introduced by the world-renowned S&S Sansei in February of 2017, and it is a very simple layout. The rendering shows a non-inverting loop as the only element with a pass-by launch on the bottom, and it has 4D trains. very similar to what we see on Egenica and Dynaconda. This came out, like I said, in 2017, and we have not seen a single model since. There is not too much known about this model, and, well, it really didn't gain that much hype after the initial release. But don't get me wrong, once this animation came out, people were raving about it. Unfortunately, no parks were interested, and I could see why. With the very expensive cost of 4D trains combined with the short capacity of this ride, I don't really see any potential buyers that would want to experiment with this. Anyway, SNS after this focused more on their 4D free spins, and we are where we're at today. So, for any of you Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 fans out there, you're going to get a kick out of this one. Have you ever seen the Tilt Coaster in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3? This is a very popular model and is obviously based off of Gravity Max, but did you know that that other way to tilt actually was a patent? Yes, we usually use the tilt track to associate with tilt coasters, but the thrill lift was also a Vekoma idea. During the 2004 Euro amusement show, Vekoma showed off what would be a predecessor to the original tilt coaster. It would provide this thrill lift element that looks insane. Basically, if you don't know what it is, it has the track which is connected to an elevator lift. Once it goes up the elevator lift, it tilts it 90 degrees down so it can place the riders into a tilting position. This was going to be for hypercoaster height tilt coasters because Vekoma planned on making tilt coasters over 200 feet tall, but unfortunately none of them came through and they did not have any major buyers that came past a proposal. It never came to be, and after initial hype, it faded into obscurity and is now known just as an element or RCT3. Please forgive me if I mispronounce this in the comments, but Hoi Sango was a Japanese manufacturer which is known very well for Adrenaline Drive. This is the ride that is powered by screaming. It's very popular for the GP and made a pretty viral video on Theme Park Review's channel. Another very famous coaster that they're known for is Voyage at Fuji-Q Highland, the suspended coaster at the park, but did you know that they were going to make something that would try to rival some of the biggest manufacturers in the world? They were actually one of the original companies to come up with a patent for a fourth dimensional roller coaster. This was out even before aerodynamics. In the late 90s, they came out with this concept, and they called it the Sledgehammer. Yeah, look at this. I mean, looking at X2 now, this looks like an even crazier layout. This was most likely a free spinning layout, and it was designed for the train to be mostly upright, so it would definitely provide a lot of forces on the riders. It was a large model, like I said, but was it before its time? Because it never came to be. Maybe because of how little known this manufacturer was outside of Asia, but I really wish one of these could have been built. They actually built a testing model on their grounds, and they actually had people on it. I think that's crazy. So this ride was very close to being an actual ride, but no potential buyers came in. Schwarzkopf really needs no introduction. Since the mid-60s, they have been innovating the coaster industry and providing lasting memories for families. The company dismantled after Schwarzkopf's death and a few problems financially, and by the early 2000s the company was dismantled. But during its heyday, they had so many roller coasters to look at, and even had roller coasters at Cedar Point, the roller coaster capital of the world. Another big park that they had coasters at? Busch Gardens Williamsburg. They had two coasters here, a Jetstar and a Wildcat model, and by the 80s, Busch Gardens Williamsburg contracted them for a third. But this wouldn't be a normal clone. This would be a brand new prototype. Busch Gardens have seen some patents for Aero suspended coasters, including the new Bat at Kings Island at the time. They wanted to go to Schwarzkopf for a suspended coaster to provide a world's first for both Schwarzkopf and Busch Gardens. And this was a very unique ride. There are a few slight differences between what the Schwarzkopf suspended would have been and the Aero would have been. First off, this is the only information we really have. It has one car with 7 rows, so I'm assuming that this would be a lot more tame since the trains are not as flexible as the Aero ones. This one would be a lot more tame as Busch Gardens records would have it, and it would swoop through the terrain similar to how the first half of Big Bad Wolf was. So, how are you thinking about the fate of this ride? Well, basically, this was around the time that Schwarzkopf went into bankruptcy, and the park decided to choose aerodynamics instead. They created what we know now as the Big Bad Wolf. Existed until the late 2000s, this ride was a very popular Aero Suspended, and definitely, in my opinion, was a better fit than what the Schwarzkopf prototype would have been. As for the model itself, it did not find any other buyers, and the Schwarzkopf Suspended coaster was left in the dust. Peter Schaffer had the mind of an innovator. He worked with many roller coaster manufacturers such as Intamin, and he was mainly on the construction side of all things. But he always wanted a ride company of his own. In IAAPA of 2004, the same expo that brought us the Thrill Lift, he introduced something that would be very popular at the IAAPA floor. Now, in July of that year, Vekoma came out with a new model called their Moto Coaster. This was a pretty tame roller coaster, but the kick, it had motorcycle restraints and seats. This was at Toverland, and it was pretty popular and gained likes of the GP and enthusiasts alike all over the world. Schaffer decided that he wanted to take this to the next step, and instead of a tame layout, he wanted to go high. He wanted a launch up to 110 kilometers an hour or 68 miles an hour. There are a few other differences, such as that it would not be 2 across, and the seats would be 1 across. The restraints are a lot bigger and bulkier, probably because of the more thrilling layout, and it would go up to heights of over 50 feet. This would be a very thrilling coaster, and would probably be one of the best motorbike coasters today. It was much more thrilling than Moto, I could say that, and even looking at the models today that have motorcycle trains, I can't think of anything that would compare to something like this. It gained a lot of hype initially at the expo, but never came to be, after, well, the fact that this wasn't a major manufacturer in Schaffer himself, and the fact that they could easily go with a cheaper option to impress the GP with a smaller moto coaster. Up next, we have a concept from the one and the only Aerodynamics. Aero in the 80s was very experimental, and came out with many different ride prototypes like the Aero Pipeline Coaster, the Aero Flying Turns, and another resurrection of an old ride, the Aero Virginia Reel. Once again, we don't need any introduction about Aero. If you're an enthusiast, you know that Aero is one of the most, if not the most, innovative manufacturers on the planet. They came up with so many projects, and this was one of many. Unfortunately, this project did not come to be. Virginia Reels, if you don't know, were popular in the early 1900s. These were usually made in-house, and were on wooden tracks. They had spinning cars on the tracks, and the carts shaped like a circle, but all of them were gone by the midpoint of the 20th century. Aero in the summer of 1987 wanted to bring it back. There are a few differences between the old traditional model and this model, one of them being that 1, it's a lot faster and a lot more thrilling, and 2, the track is steel tubular track. I think if this came out, it would definitely be a great model, and I am really sad to see that this model didn't come through. The reason? A lot of wear and tear on the trains. Looking at the thinness of the track and the thickness of the trains, I could see why. Unfortunately, no one was really interested in it, and it faded into obscurity. It gained a little bit more hype with the resurrection of the Legacy of Aero documentary, but other than that, it didn't gain that much hype initially. In the early 2000s, Maurer Rides was blowing up. They came up with a bunch of new roller coaster patents that blew up all over the world. One of them being the Xcar. This Xcar would provide very minimal restraints with a very high thrill, and would be one of Maurer's first very high thrill coasters. Some of the popular rides include Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket, X Coaster, Abismo, and many others across the world. These are pretty thrilling rides from what I've heard, but did you know that they were going to have a spinning variant of this? Yes, they were going to have an Xcar with spinning trains. In 2003, they came out with a patent for a spinning car. It would have 6-seat trains, and it would all be in a circle facing outwards, similar to their spinning coasters now, but 6 instead of 4. It would be very flexible and would be able to go upside down. It could do almost anything a regular Xcar could do. At the time, they were making lots of profits out of their traditional Xcar model, and this model just kind of fell under the shadow of the traditional Xcar. I think this would have been a phenomenal model, even world class, But unfortunately, the success of the Xcar, which is still a good model within its own right, took over and overshadowed this incredible model. Now, we are at our final entry in the list, and now we are going to talk about SBF Visa. SBF Visa is very quickly growing. If you don't know, they are very famous for the model of the spinner, the SBF spinner as otherwise known, and these models are popping up all over the world as we speak. There are dozens, if not hundreds of these. And they also have a hamster wheel model, which is popping up all over the world as well. Even know that this ride is extremely new and modern. But did you know before the hype of the spinning coasters, they had a roller coaster concept that were at traveling parks? This was Cool and Fresh. This is a very weird roller coaster and is debatedly the steepest coaster on Earth, but it never got an official requirement. This was a very janky roller coaster and only provided a few elements: a drop, a loop, and a turnaround that led into the brake run. But did you know after initial success of the fair ride, success of this ride, they decided that they wanted to make a more permanent installation. Soon after, they came out with this concept, and the rendering shows a much longer version. Like I said, this was meant for permanent parks as opposed to fairs, and this would be a much longer layout. This would be a competitor to the Gerstlauer Eurofighters, and it would have 2 loops, a massive helix, a really weird element, I think this is a 0G roll, and then a turnaround. It definitely looked like a very weird concept, but looking at how the original Cool and Fresh rides, yeah, people did not like this at all. And with the jankiness of the original model, it didn't gain any hype and the plans were scrapped soon after. And as we know, SBF would be bigger than it's ever been. Anyway, that was my video. I was very happy to make this video. I love looking at models that were never built. What do you think in the comments? If you wish for one of these models to actually come into fruition, which one would it be? What's your idea of a good coaster model? This is Cedar Flags, and I'll see you all later.